Welcome everyone to Ladder Daily Digest. We are doing 1-minute Mormon Stories episodes to honor the 20th year that Mormon Stories podcast is in. And so today we have Maven, and she's going to talk about an impactful Mormon Stories episode featuring Dr. Michael Coe. Tell us about it, Maven.
Yeah. This is an early one, very, very early on in Mormon Stories. But I think he's done 2 interviews. So I think there's one, I can't remember the numbers now. Gene, maybe you have him on the topic. There's, I think in the 300s and the 600s. So I'm the first one. It's not available on YouTube yet. This was when it was just audio only. So Michael Coe is an archaeologist, which falls under the branch of anthropology, which is what I studied in school. There are a couple different branches. So I specifically studied cultural anthropology, which has to do more with kind of modern people and groups and how we form societies. There's a lot of overlap, I think, with sociology. People might understand that more. There's also linguistic anthropology, which obviously covers languages. There's biological anthropology, which is where you get your forensic anthropologists. So if you watch your crime shows, the people who determine, or if somebody's digging for a building somewhere and a skeleton is found, forensic anthropologist under that umbrella of biological anthropology, they're the ones to determine if it's a recent crime victim or somebody from 2,000 years ago, and that kind of stuff. And then there's archaeology, which is looking at people in history and cultures of the past. So that's where Dr. Michael Coe comes in. And specifically, his main point of research is in the Meso-American area. So just like Dr. John Lenwall, honestly, who we've had on before. But I think their interviews have been extremely different and fascinating for like very, very different ways, despite the fact that they both study and have the same, I think, knowledge base of the same thing. And so I highly recommend it. Michael Coe has since passed on, so he's a resource, that's not available anymore other than what's available digitally. But the reason why it had an impact on me was that I remember, I think for a lot of us, we've seen there's lists that go around in the church of things that people, have claimed are anachronisms in the Book of Mormon, but that end up getting found. And it's honestly a really major issue today when it comes to belief in the Book of Mormon is
such as when Joseph Smith says there were oxen and cattle, and
right,
those are European.
The honeybee, all kinds of things. Yeah. So these are potentially anachronisms that prove the book and therefore the whole religion false. And so I remember when I was younger, hearing about this list and like, oh, look at these things have already been found, and genuinely believing that everything would be found because the Book of Mormon is true and real. And so if it mentions this or that, or, then things would be found. And then, and it's
just a matter of time.
Right. It's just a matter of time. Like when you think about like digging up literally like every square inch of earth, like top to bottom between North and South America, 2 entire continents, like it's impossible. So, it just takes time for the right thing to be uncovered. And of course, amazing things are uncovered all the time. And sometimes even recently, I think I recall, it's been a long time now since I studied in the Jerusalem Center, but I remember on one of the field trips there learning that there are some parts of the Bible that are more strongly believed to be myth versus history, and then there's kind of a point where it starts to cross over. And so King David, this iconic figure, was he real or not?
That's like the cusp, right? That's like the very oldest person in the Bible that there might be some evidence for.
There's there's the origin story. Yeah, exactly. And it's when we start getting into, historical figures like Nebuchadnezzar, we know existed. It was an Assyrian ruler. And so when we have artifacts from this time period, that these events are supposedly happen, and they are referencing real people, but they say the king of Israel and they don't specify who. It's like, who is that? Is that David? Is David real? Is David a king, or is he just part of origin story? And I think it was in the late 90s. So that's pretty recent, considering overall, was the first finding. And I think it was up in Tel Dan, which is on the north end of Israel, was the first kind of inscription that we had that said King David on it. So, you know, so it's just like, even in Israel, like the you know, established Bible country, people can point to these are these things and these places that happen in the Bible, you know, in a much stronger way than you can do for the Book of Mormon, you know. So I just thought, like, this will happen. It'll happen for the Book of Mormon too, more and more and more. And that's partly why I was initially interested in anthropology, and then I got away from it, ended up coming back in college. But was this idea of like going out and discovering and studying these cultures and being able to be the one to kind of make the connection between secular science and what we already know about the Book of Mormon, because there was no doubt in my mind that of course they would connect, you know. So and I was completely unaware that there were already people who had been there and done that, quite literally.
It's
Anyway,
sort of like Bart Ehrman. He wanted to know what the words said. If the Bible's so important, and he knew that Jesus didn't speak English,
yeah,
that what were the words that were written in either Greek or
right.
Assyrian or whatever?
What originals do we have? What's
Yeah.
the oldest that we have? Exactly.
Because if those
Exactly.
are the really important words, we should know what those are and what they meant in their context.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you had the same thing. If there's artifacts out there, Maven Brody was going to find them.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, if not me, then somebody. I just thought, given time, science would, you know, vindicate. I don't know if that's the right word, but you know, it would start to match up. And so, but when you can't do that, because the lazy way for any member is to be like, well, you know, just we haven't found it yet, and somebody will over there someday. Somebody ought to do, you know, we should get some Mormon anthropologists over there. Never mind that there are many, but yeah, and that honestly, for a long time, it's just so easy to think that way. It's a very good thought stopping technique. It's just that, you know, we'll find it. And we saw it recently with the Paul brothers interview on Mormon Stories, that, you know, you can't find a steel sword. Well, we haven't like unearthed everything. So this is what was really interesting to me about the Michael Coe episode, was just kind of a broad view of the kinds of things that we have for evidence and the things that we do know. Because besides you know, this idea that there's just missing things, but they can definitely be there, that's not true. Because there are things that, you know, if they existed, there would be other evidences around that we would have uncovered, and would have made a difference. And so the fact that, you know, that these other evidences are absent, it really does mean that we are not going to find a grain of wheat from Nephite and Lamanite days. There will never be a pot found that's got some in there. There will never be a steel sword.
To that point, you could never find any steel or iron swords.
Right.
But if they did have them, you would find smelting.
Yes.
Or the creation things, the slag. You would find evidence of all the things that would be surround that technology.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I remember, I don't know if this was the Michael Coe episode, actually, or if it might have been another one. It might have been Dr. Lunwall. I think it was Michael Coe, though, that talked about this process, and just the fact that, you know, blacksmithing and these kinds of things, these would be city center. And we have unearthed many cities where we know what the center is, because often it'll be a pyramid, you know, or something of great worship, or some kind of a meeting house, you know, public thing. So we have unearthed entire cities. There is no blacksmithing anywhere in where it would make sense for them to be. They're not gonna be an old hut in the woods randomly somewhere. This would be like central.
In Pioneer's progress to the West in America, a grist mill or a lumber mill would be one of the first things that you would build, because you're going to need to buy
a lot of fire,
build houses. You're going to need to feed people. And so those are, like you say, city center types of things. You build the city around those type of enterprises.
Right. Right. So I guess that's, in a nutshell, that was the impact of this episode with Michael Coe, was just to kind of see what the broad expanse of things, instead of just thinking in this kind of Mormon term of just really small things that just need to be uncovered, the really systemic things about it. And they really range a lot. So I mean, with the metalworking, we talked about smelting and blacksmithing, and they would take a lot of lumber for that. So that's not there. If we go super microscopic, one of the things he talked about was coring, kind of like they do ice cores. You can core through bogs because things just layer on, and it's just this, it's the same principle. You can see exactly what was there, what kind of vegetation, even down to pollen, because when it comes to pollen for plants, it's widespread. There's such tiny particles that, when the wind blows and they're scattered, these microscopic particles are scattered for miles and miles. So even though they're so tiny and you think you can't find them, you can, and we find them for things that existed, that we know exist. We are finding this pollen, this microscopic molecule, and that, it seems ironic to say it this way, but that's like the spread of them is too large to hide, or like they're or almost too small to hide. That seems kind of oxymoronic, but that's, but that's
Right.
the
So like
case.
you're saying, like a grain of wheat could become dirt over tens of thousands of, tens of years,
Yeah,
dozens
it
of
would
years.
decay and it would be completely gone
And
potentially. Yeah,
and we wouldn't know the residue. But
right.
pollen sort of doesn't break down the
Pollen
same
would be
way.
there, at least in the bogs. Like pollen can break down too, but the
And
bogs
so,
will layer it and preserve it.
and that's
Which
why they know, and that's the thing that I think John Dehlin was surprised to find out is it's not just the things that are in the Book of Mormon that are anachronistic, it's the things that are not there, like
true.
cocoa bean,
Yeah, and maize.
maize.
Right. Right. Exactly.
So you actually had already deconstructed God because of
Yeah.
your Old Testament sort of studies, and having this sort of deconstruct Mormonism. How helpful was that to you?
I think it was helpful in that's a good question, because it did feel, I think, validating, honestly. It was quite validating. And I think, not that I wouldn't be upset, if a steel sword was found, but it's still, I think maybe it's one of those things where it's still such a common apologetic in the church that anachronisms are valid reasons to disbelieve the Book of Mormon. And in the case with anything, just one anachronism is all it takes to prove a document, or something to be a fraud or false. There should not be even one. Yeah, because of, Mormon have such a simplistic understanding of
Surface level.
archaeology things. Yeah, we think that there's room for that. And again, to reference the Paul brothers in the Mormon Stories episode they did, they're trying to defend the faith. When John brought up anachronisms, that was something they brought up for all of them, for wheat, for swords, and all that, is that we haven't found it yet. So that's still a very, very common
We
idea.
haven't found unicorns yet.
Right, right. But that wouldn't be very well, what's the word, convincing to, to a TBM, if they said that. And when I say TBM, that's a true believing member. So yeah, like it's ineffective. So learning this kind of stuff helps to really, I think, shore that up, and even understand just for yourself, if not for the sake of other people when they bring it up, to have an answer, even for yourself, because some people's deconstruction isn't as thorough or as quick as mine was. So if they might be, if there's a discovery that seems to kind of fit, they might be like, I don't know, like, maybe is there something to this? Like horses, we know horses were in the Americas way before the events of the Book of Mormon, but they died out.
2000 BC.
Yeah, but then, when there's anything, I think that wasn't known initially. So when the cave paintings were able to be dated to be much older than Nephite Book of Mormon times, then, that was an evidence. But again, the more you learn, the more you realize that it actually doesn't work at all. And so I think for that reason, it's validating for yourself to know, like, no, there's not going to be, like, the city of Zarahemla is not going to be found. But also, if you've got believing family and friends like the Paul brothers who say, like, no, like, it can be found someday, you can know that it can. I want to go back to the kernel idea, though, the idea that, some things are so small, like if we can't find a grain of wheat, like, what does that mean? The thing is, especially in sites, more established sites like in the old world in Jerusalem and stuff. And this was actually part of the dig. I went on one dig for one day, which was enough to keep me in the cultural anthropology realm and not want to do archaeology. But me and three other, myself and three other colleagues from the BYU Jerusalem Center were able to kind of privately attend this archaeological dig that was happening. And it was one of my colleagues that was tasked with an area that they knew was a kitchen. They had found enough broken potsherds, or they knew enough to know, like, this is a kitchen area. And I'm so glad that they tasked him with this particular task, because I would not have done well with it. But he was given basically a very fine brush and like 1 square foot basically of this kitchen area. And he was asked to just very finely sweep dust off and look for really anything, but ideally an olive pit, because they were really common in cooking, and olive pits could be dated. If I remember correctly, you can date an olive pit to the year. That's how accurate you can get. And so that's incredibly important for the dating of a site, is if you can find something like that. And people do all of the time. And so again,
And
like,
you can tell whether they were a virgin or not. No,
no. Yeah, virgin olive oil pit.
Yeah.
Yeah. And and he actually did find one. So that was really cool. And I was kind of glad for him that his work paid off, because I mean, as you can imagine, when something has filled up and packed with dirt, like an entire room over hundreds of years, that when you get to a point where you're just like sifting, I would have lost my mind. So I was doing something that involved more bodily movement. So anyway, yeah. So again, just the idea that, like, we would absolutely find, and we do find food items all the time. First, I mean, they can be found in like fossilized, basically like feces piles. Like, we can learn a lot from that. Those can be fossilized and can preserve information. Humans preserved grains and things like that. So they're found in pots. They're found all over the place, because it's garbage. It's human garbage, and it's everywhere. So yeah.
Yeah. And so that's one thing about the Mormon Stories episodes, and I've heard it over and over again, is that people say that when they watch the Mormon Stories episodes, it's either confirming about some things, or it helps them to not feel crazy. They hear someone else's story and they say, oh, I'm not crazy for not believing other people have the same experience.
Right.
And
they can project the laziness onto you. It's like you're being faithless, or you're expecting, little grains of wheat, and how ridiculous are you to have such high expectations for such a small thing for us to find, again, in 2 entire continents worth of dirt. Like, it is not just like I'm crazy, but am I being unreasonable and hard-hearted? Because those are the narratives that we're getting, that we just have this unreasonable standard. We're deliberately doing it. We're making it difficult for the Lord to provide a level of proof that's that's reasonable or believable to us, but obviously not reasonable to a member. But and really, again, it's just projection, because they're the ones that are engaged in the lazy thinking, which is just, we haven't found it yet, but
right.
we will.
And we're conditioned to think that are we being tricked by anti-Mormon lies?
Yeah.
Or some other information that somehow robs us of our faith that prior had been confirmed, because we had a feeling and we were told how to interpret that feeling as a confirming that the church was true.
Yeah.
And I remember even like 15 years ago saying, Disney movies are scripture, because I feel so moved every time, the princess, is released or victorious or something.
Yeah.
So anyway,
highly recommend that episode, and also his later ones.
Yeah, and we'll have it in the description. So look down below, and there'll be links to the recordings that are on the MormonStories.org. And so everybody look for that. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe and all those good things, and have a great rest of the year. Bye-bye.